Hello and welcome to the Christian Study Abroad podcast, where we bring together leading voices at the intersection of Christian higher education and global learning. My name is Greg Belgum, and I'm the Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at Living and Learning International and serve as the conference chair for the Christian Study Abroad Conference. And I am joined today by Dr. Kevin Connor. Dr. Connor is a professor of psychology and the department chair of psychology at Liberty University, where he has served since 2011. He has counseling experience in both inpatient and outpatient settings. His continued focus centers on work with couples and families in premarital, marital, and faith-based settings. And Dr. Connor has had the opportunity to lead students on short-term study abroad trips in Europe, Central America, South America, and Africa. Dr. Connor has a passion for healthy marriages, families, and relationships, which drives his involvement in community groups, suicide intervention, multicultural engagement, and human trafficking awareness. His areas of study include marriage and family, multicultural psychology, and applied behavioral analysis. So, Dr. Connor, welcome to the podcast and excited to have a conversation with you today.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity and just talking about all this.
Yeah. Well, I know it's something you've thought a lot about, but before we jump to study abroad, could we zoom back out a little bit? And could you kind of orient listeners to a little bit more of your background? I know we read your bio, but some of your research areas and how that fits into the psychology department at Liberty.
Certainly, and it's been an interesting journey. I actually started off with being a youth major and a business minor. I was really focused on the development of people. In fact, one of my key verses that I take to heart is where Timothy is told by Paul, train these things to faithful men who will be able to train others also. And so there was just that desire to continue to work with people in relationship. And just through God's guidance, it continued to take me on this pathway of a mixture of church involvement as well as really just people involvement and world involvement, because I recognize that the relationship of our faith oftentimes is challenged with our integration of how we live in the world, which brought me to a counseling dynamic of wanting to really work with people and help them navigate some of the challenges in life, which with my research and areas deal with helplessness and hopelessness of suicide or being at risk of and vulnerable of being trafficked, because solid, healthy relationships really do help us live life and get through life in a way that is healthy and satisfying.
Hmm. Wow. Yeah. I mean, the integration of faith with our life in the real world is really critical. I mean, Jesus walked, he was incarnational in his ministry as he lived and breathed with people and in community. So I love that call that you have of it. This isn't just a heady exercise of faith. It's where faith kind of meets the real world.
Exactly.
I love that. Could you kind of share a little bit more about the psychology department kind of at Liberty, some of the coursework, some of the maybe the degrees that y'all
Mhm.
offer, and yeah, maybe start there as well.
Yeah, certainly, and that was another odd one because psychology oftentimes is not seen as very integrative or faith-based, and we'll get that responses sometimes from parents as they come in. They're like, "What? How do you do the Bible and psychology?" And at our department, we really are focused on that integrative piece to say, "Hey, look, there's this truth of God's word, and then there's this truth that God has in the world. How do we bring the research and the understanding of the human psyche, how we think, how we behave, into an understanding of of how we see Scripture?" I mean, so often you see in Scripture, we are commanded to do, well, that's behavior, but then also we're commanded to have the same mind as Christ. Well, that's our thinking. So you have this cognitive and behavioral piece that's interplayed even in Scripture. And so our department really focuses on gaining an understanding of the research and how we as believers can look at that research to help others, with our ultimate goal of being able to help others, whether it's through research, doing quality empirical research or being in the counseling session, helping our students work towards a master's in counseling. So we've got the undergrad in psych. Then we also have a master's in what really is focused on public mental health, as well as industrial organizational psych, which gets into the business side of things. Then we have a PsyD, which work towards a clinical psychologist. And then we just uh, started a master's in applied behavioral analysis, which focuses on the behavioral piece. Because sometimes, our mind is not thinking the way it should. And yet God tells it would just do. You need to obey or you need to do. And so there's a behavioral piece of maybe I just need to get my behavior in line.
Hmm. Okay. I love how you painted that picture of both some of the mission and how sometimes the field of psychology and kind of the church can, not always. Yeah, maybe there's some baggage there that you have to walk out. And so yeah, I love how you shared that. Okay, we mentioned at the top about the various continents and parts of the
Mhm.
globe that you've traveled to with students. How have you integrated study abroad as a part of your pedagogy while at Liberty?
In a number of different ways. I was first introduced to the concept of a international classroom, I guess is a way to say it, when I was a co-leader to a trip to Rwanda. That was the first time I had ever traveled international. And before then, obviously I was aware of the globe, just did not have a global perspective. And when I came to Rwanda, honestly, I just my perspective, my mind, my heart, everything about me was just so blown open to the reality that, and again, it, but the reality that God works differently in different ways in different people's lives, even in cultural settings. And so the way God was working in Rwanda was different than what I knew. And I was like, wow, God is a universal cultural God that I want to get to know better. And so that led me on a journey to begin to adopt the the practice of engaging students, because back to that key verse of I wanted to train others to do what God has called them to do. And in that cultural setting, to train students to say, hey, look, here's an opportunity of where I can take my academics, I can take what I'm learning, and I can learn it for this culture. But when I place it in a different culture, it's the same dynamics, but applied differently. And that just opens up critical thinking. It opens up our metacognition. And a lot of the research indicates, man, that individual is a better culturally minded person because of engagement in different countries in very targeted ways, which is different from, if I were to go on a tour and on vacation in France, there's going to be some dynamics. But then when I go to France and I study in an academic ministry service oriented way, my growth and my development is just astronomical.
Mm. Yeah, not all travel is equal
No.
is probably the understatement of the year. But yeah, I think, one of the things I keep pointing to in this podcast, and it seems like it emerges through a lot of these conversations, is the idea of having a guide. The
Mm,
guide is the person that helps students that has been there before, either literally, into that part of the globe or, metaphorically in their experiences, and helps students kind of unpack a lot of those pieces. I mean, your testimony of sharing how your mind was blown open, that moment of everything that had been set there before kind of cracks and is like, okay, there's more here than I knew before. You got to walk that out with students. And so
yeah.
yeah, okay, I want to swerve into really the idea of faith integration. And
Mhm.
so you've been talking about that both on campus at at Liberty, but and then also for your own kind of personal mission statement as you approach life and vocation. I heard that. What about study abroad do you think is distinctive for faith formation in ways that maybe staying on campus or other settings can't really access? So what about study abroad do you think is distinctive for faith formation?
I think study abroad, especially when it's incorporating a service component, it has an intentional focus of I am wanting to learn and grow in my understanding of whatever culture, but this particular culture while I'm engaging with them. And it's that engagement that brings application because I can sit back in the classroom and I can learn about Greek culture. That's one of the countries that I'll be in this next summer. And so I can learn about Greek culture. I can listen to Greek music. I can eat Greek food. But there's a huge chasm between that engagement and then being there in Greece, serving alongside with them and learning with them of how they do service with their people, of how they interact among themselves. There's just this level of engagement that brings me into with them in a way that a classroom it can begin to get there, but that shoulder to shoulder, side by side, active learning, because when you're in another country, I mean, your brain is just firing. I mean, it's all new. And you're like, hey, teach me more, teach me more. And then to monopolize on that and say, okay, now let's focus this in a way that we can really learn, like, for example, with psychology within our discipline, and then take that back.
Mhm. Could you share some examples of specific service projects that you guys have done in the past?
Definitely. So last time we were in Greece, they had just dealt with some of the fires. And so we had an opportunity, and this was even just a simple thing. We had an opportunity to work with a safe house where we would go. We heard from the ministry, we heard about some of the challenges. We went to the safe house. And what we did at the safe house is I got the students, they said, look, the government is requiring everybody in this area just to simply clean up brush. I said, I realize this has nothing to do with psychology, but it has everything to do with us understanding culture. And so we cleaned up all the brush, we piled it all up, and it was a grunt work service project. But it really brought to light for the students, wait a minute, they were in jeopardy of losing their safe house or losing their resources, which when you lose resources, you feel helpless and hopeless. And simply cleaning up their yard and cleaning up all the brush was an effort to help maintain and capture back their sense of safety and control. And so, even though it was just cleaning up the brush, it had those psychological aspects when we were serving. And you could do that in the US, but maybe out in California where they had the fires, but doing it here, like in our location in Virginia, well, there's not much connection with the need for safety and feeling like you're losing those resources.
So the way you just shared about that, obviously you're drawing the connection between the work project and um, some of the academic outcomes that you have around psychological learning, as well as the faith formation. You pointed to service being a core part of faith formation. Um, Yeah, can you talk about the opportunity that some of that debrief and discussion presents in a way that if you don't do it or kind of miss those opportunities, some of the learning maybe doesn't happen. That's a very leading question. I'm kind of, but yeah, I mean, I maybe I'll just say I think clearly the debrief and the discussion and you drawing those connections helps students with that learning. I mean, would you care to kind of expand on that at all?
Yeah. Well, and we do. I'm intentional about making sure we're debriefing on a regular basis. Actually, before the trip, we'll talk about okay, here's some things to be alerted to, and then during the trip, we'll take the opportunities of what are some things you're currently being alerted to, and then afterwards, what are some things that are continuing in your level of awareness. And so when we sit down and we debrief, for example, on that day, oftentimes there are a number of things throughout the day, and I'll ask the students, okay, well, what was a standout? What was something that stuck out to you? And they may have said the fact that we can serve that population, even though we're not counseling with that population, we can serve that population in a way that is meaningful. even just with grunt work. Or, man, the ability for us to be able to clean up that debris, it really gave them a sense of security because they said, "Man, I'm so glad because I had no idea how we were going to get this done." And those would often be conversations that maybe a student would have with somebody in the house or one of the agency members, where they would look at the student and say, man, we've been trying to do this for weeks, and you don't know how much this means to us. And for them to be able to recognize that in that debrief and acknowledge that and say, yeah, I didn't realize how something so little can go such a long way, and that can take place anywhere. That if I hand out a glass of water, to me it's a glass of water, but to that person it has so much meaning and value. And that's where I think the immersive study abroad opportunity gets that type of a connection.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it feels very like embodied, like your whole person is doing this work. And so from a
Exactly.
like a learning perspective, I'm sure that it carries with you with a student in a really meaningful and long-term way because of you said all your senses are coming alive and you're
Yeah.
feeling that. Um okay, can you so some of those pieces around service projects, and then the debrief that's associated with that. Are there other moments of kind of faith integration that you see? And yeah, I don't want to lead on that question too much. Just yeah, any other kind of key or intentional or specific kind of designed elements into a study abroad program that you found to be helpful?
So for in general for our design uh, for a program, and I try to work with our faculty that lead trips to kind of adopt this progression. And it does have a faith integration and academic immersion piece. And that's when we first hit the ground in a country. The idea is to orient the itinerary in a way that students gain a general feel or impression of the culture of the country. What's it like? What's the culture? In a truthful, almost neutral way. Because then when we work for the next several days, we're going to be working with the people. And especially from a liberty psychology perspective, we're working in some what would be considered some challenging people groups. It might be individuals that are at risk of human trafficking. So it might be immigrants and refugees. It could be disadvantaged peoples. It could be orphans. It could be widows. And so that can be very draining, but also very engaging because they're applying their academics, they're implying their faith, they're implying their command to love God and love others, and to spread the gospel to Judea and Samaria and the uttermost parts of the world. But then on the back end of that, we always try to engage in some type of, in our psychology profession, self care. That way they have a balanced view of that culture. If I just go in, and this is where it's different. If I just go in for a tourist, all I see is the good things. If I just go in on a missions trip, oftentimes what I'm left with is this is all the bad things or all the challenges. We try to orient a trip so that we see, hey, these are the good things. Here's the things that are amazing about this culture. Here's some of the challenges. And then here's the beauty, almost like a sandwich, to be able to provide a balanced view of that culture that that student can then take away and appreciate and recognize in a multiple different cultures.
Hmm. That's really good. That's really good. Are there any I'm sure there's times, but where you have that kind of ideal and it just doesn't quite land with students where maybe the challenges or the beauty are kind of outsized. Have you seen that happen with students where the balance doesn't quite land?
Um, eh, yes, and I'm thinking particularly in Greece because we're looking at risk populations of human trafficking, and human trafficking is a deep, dark, despicable, unfortunate, terrible hole that if I keep myself in can be very um, overwhelming. And so I often will have on the back end conversations such as, because I mentioned the glass of water, I said this challenge can be overwhelming. Um, However, with any type of challenge culture, even within the counseling profession, it's all about baby steps.
Hmm.
So what can you do to help you process that challenge? Oh, well, we just had a race here with Freedom 424, and it was a 5K race. I said, you could hand a cup of water to a runner that's running by for that race. It's like, just a cup of water? Yeah, because that's a way that you can help process some of that challenge sometime, recognizing, yeah, I've got to be able to deal with the cultural and massiveness of who it is. But then also back to that faith learning, recognizing that God's already been there, He's there now, and He's going to be there in the future, and He has everything
Hmm.
wrapped up in His arms. So coming back to our faith, I'm intentional about having just a quick bite from the Word, a devotional every single day while we're on a trip, just to continue to reorient students to, hey, yeah, there's challenges, there's struggles, there's darkness, but I've got a God that calls Himself the light.
Yeah, clearly there's a lot of kind of vision and specific programmatic design elements that you're
Mhm.
coming at programs with, which is critical as the faculty lead. And also in the midst of the uncertainty of a study abroad program, there's all kinds of things that emerge organically. How have you seen, again, kind of specific to the faith integration, where students are growing deep in their faith, understanding who God is in a new way? Ways that kind of emerges organically,
Mhm.
compared to some of the designed pieces in a study abroad program, and how do you see those two kind of playing together?
And that's where it kind of goes against me because I like to be very organized and controlled. And it's like, hey, here's my itinerary. So I tell the students as much as I'm reminding myself before we even get into a plane to fly someplace. Flexibility is the key word. I have got to keep my mind in a position of flexibility because you can plan things, but then there's the organic nature of what takes place. There might be an interaction that I may not have. Um, I would almost say from my own personal perspective, man, I didn't want that to happen because that just didn't go the way I wanted it to. But then also allowing, um, probably more so my personal self, to let that go, and then in a classic way say, okay, God, what are you doing here? I don't want to miss out on what you're doing because I want to do what I want to do.
Mhm.
And so I'll at times see that organic piece, and I have to on the front end be alerted to it and be mindful of it so that I can get on that piece and say, okay, God, let's take this. Okay, there it is. Now, is there a time to come back into where we have? Because there is a structure, there is a schedule. But then how do I plan the schedule in such a way that it allows for God to show up in ways that I know I'm not going to be prepped for?
Sure. Yeah, I'm just encouraged by the power of prayer in how
Mm.
you're describing that. Just a continual prayer and attunement to the Spirit to say, God, what are you up to, and how can I, you know, be oriented to you and what you might have for our group. So I love that. Thank you so much for sharing about some of your experience already. I
Mhm.
think just to kind of to close, do you have any advice maybe or thoughts for maybe a faculty member, psychology or really any discipline as they're thinking about integrating study abroad, whether it's short term or something longer,
Mhm.
into their degree plans, or maybe they don't even know where to start. I mean, any thoughts or advice that you might have?
Yeah, definitely. I think one of the key aspects, and it kind of goes back to the very beginning, is the aspect about relationship. If a faculty member is thinking about leading a trip, I think one of the key aspects is to begin developing relationship, whether it's with, like, for example, Living and Learning or some agency that is represented in that country. Work with the relationships and allow that to develop so that a level of trust and engagement can be established which then can be carried into the country because as we said, there's going to be the organic stuff. There's going to be the unexpected things. There's going to be, when you're traveling with a bunch of students, I can't expect everything to go perfectly all the time, but I should develop a relationship with both the agency and the in-country representatives as quickly as possible so that we can learn to trust each other when things aren't happening quite the way they are. Because I know I'm not going to be able to handle all the solutions, but I have a relationships in such a way that we can all work together with this. And so there's almost a safety and a security as opposed to thinking, oh, wait, I've got to have this whole thing planned and I got to make sure and I doesn't work, especially when traveling abroad. It's got to be a team mentality where the relationship is really what makes the trip successful in a lot of ways.
What a good word. Thanks for that encouragement. Well, Dr. Connor, thank you for time today to share about your story, some of your experience, the important work you're doing, training up the next generation of learners there on campus at Liberty, and the ways that you've really caught the bug of global travel, and your heart has been opened to what God is doing around the world. So thank you for time today and for sharing with us.
Definitely. And man, if I could go back to do it all over again, I would have just done it earlier so I could have more opportunities.
I love that. All right. Well, we'll talk soon.
Yep.
Are you called to more than comfort? You're looking for something that will stretch you, strengthen you, and deepen your walk with God, not another check-the-box internship. You want something real, and that's what we do. Mountain Gateway internships are designed to forge resilient, gospel-centered leaders. Your transformation begins here. Apply at mountaingateway.org/internships.